The General Overseas Service of All India Radio presents readings from an autobiography or the story of my experiments with truth. The reading from the autobiography is presented by Sri Gopalkrishna Gandhi, writer, teacher, and the youngest grandson of Kasturba Gandhi and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. The words of the Mahatma in the voice of his grandson.
I wired to the Bombay agent of Dada Abdullah and Company to arrange for my passage by the first possible boat to South Africa. Dada Abdullah had just purchased the steamship Courland and insisted on my travelling on that boat, offering to take me and my family free of charge. Another steamship, Naderi, also sailed for Durban at the same time. This was my first voyage with my wife and children. As though to warn us of the coming real storm on land, a terrible gale overtook us while we were only 4 days from Natal. The gale in which we were caught was so violent and prolonged that the passengers became alarmed. It was a solemn scene. All became one in face of the common danger. They forgot their differences and began to think of the one and only God. Every minute were heard sounds and crashes which foreboded breaches and leaks. The ship rolled to such an extent that it seemed as though she would capsize any moment. It was out of the question for anyone to remain on deck. His will be done was the only cry on every lip. At last the sky cleared, the sun made its appearance, and the captain said the storm had blown over. People's faces beamed with gladness, and with the disappearance of danger disappeared also the name of God from their lips. But the real storm was yet to come. As soon as we landed, some youngsters recognized me and shouted, "Gandhi, Gandhi!" Then they pelted me with stones, brickbats, and rotten eggs. Someone snatched away my turban, whilst others began to batter and kick me. I fainted and caught hold of the front railings of a house and stood there to get my breath. But it was impossible. They came upon me, boxing and battering. The wife of the police superintendent who knew me happened to be passing by. The brave lady came up, opened her parasol, though there was no sun then, and stood between the crowd and me. This checked the fury of the mob, as it was difficult for them to deliver blows on me without harming Mrs. Alexander. Escorted by the police, I arrived without further harm at Mr. Rustamji's place. I had bruises all over, but no abrasions except in one place. Dr. Dadi Borjor, the ship's doctor who was on the spot, rendered the best possible help. The late Mr. Chamberlain, who was then Secretary of State for the Colonies, cabled the Natal government to prosecute my assailants, to which I gave the following reply. I do not want to bring anyone to book. I am sure that when the truth becomes known, they will be sorry for their conduct. It was not long before I had settled down again. The incident added also to my professional practice. But if it enhanced the prestige of the community, it also fanned the flame of prejudice against it. As soon as it was proved that the Indian could put up a manly fight, he came to be regarded as a danger. 2 bills were introduced in the Natal Legislative Assembly. One of them calculated to affect the Indian trader adversely, and the other to impose a stringent restriction on Indian immigration. The bills considerably increased my public work and made the community more alive than ever to their sense of duty. Public work now began to absorb most of my time. My desire was to secure for the Congress a permanent fund so that it might procure property of its own and then carry on its work out of the rent of the property. The property that was purchased was leased out, and the rent was enough to meet the current expenses of the Congress. The property was vested in a strong body of trustees and is still there, but it has become the source of much internecine quarrelling, with the result that the rent of the property now accumulates in the court. After considerable experience with the many public institutions which I have managed, it has become my firm conviction that it is not good to run public institutions on permanent funds. A permanent fund carries in itself the seed of the moral fall of the institution. In our country, we experience this at every step. Some of the so-called religious trusts have ceased to render any accounts. The trustees have become the owners and are responsible to none. I have no doubt that the ideal is for public institutions to live like nature from day to day. These views were confirmed during the days of the Satyagraha in South Africa. That magnificent campaign extending over 6 years was carried on without permanent funds, though lakhs of rupees were necessary for it. I can recollect times when I did not know what would happen the next day if no subscriptions came in. When I landed at Durban in January 1897, I had 3 children with me. My sister's son, 10 years old, and my own sons, 9 and 5 years of age. Where was I to educate them? I could have sent them to the schools for European children, but only as a matter of favor and exception. No other Indian children were allowed to attend them. For these, then, they were schools established by Christian missions. But I was not prepared to send my children there, as I did not like the education imparted in those schools. I therefore kept my children with me. My inability to give them enough attention and other unavoidable causes prevented me from providing them with the literary education I had desired. And all my sons have had complaints to make against me in this matter. My profession progressed satisfactorily, but I longed for some humanitarian work of a permanent nature. Dr. Booth was the head of the St. Aidan's mission. He was a kind-hearted man and treated his patients free. I felt strongly inclined to serve as a nurse in this hospital. I found time to serve in the small hospital. This meant 2 hours every morning, including the time taken in going to and from the hospital. This work brought me some peace. It consisted in ascertaining the patient's complaints, laying the facts before the doctor, and dispensing the prescriptions. It brought me in close touch with suffering Indians, most of them indentured Tamil, Telugu, or North India men. I had 2 sons born in South Africa, and my service in the hospital was useful in solving the question of their upbringing. My independent spirit was a constant source of trial. My wife and I had decided to have the best medical aid at the time of her delivery. But if the doctor and the nurse were to leave us in the lurch at the right moment, what was I to do? So I studied the things necessary for safe labor. I read Dr. Tribhuvan Das's book, Mane Shikhamar, Advice to a Mother. The birth of the last child put me to the severest test. The travail came on suddenly. The doctor was not immediately available, and some time was lost in fetching the midwife. Even if she had been on the spot, she could not have helped delivery. I had to see through the safe delivery of the baby. My careful study of the subject in Dr. Tribhuvan Das's work was of inestimable help. I was not nervous. I am convinced that for the proper upbringing of children, the parents ought to have a general knowledge of the care and nursing of babies. The education of the child begins with conception. The physical and mental states of the parents at the moment of conception are reproduced in the baby. Then during the period of pregnancy, it continues to be affected by the mother's moods, desires and temperament, as also by her ways of life. After birth, the child imitates the parents and for a considerable number of years entirely depends on them for its growth.
You just heard the reading from the Autobiography of Mahatma Gandhi, presented by Shri Gopalkrishna Gandhi, the youngest grandson of Kasturba Gandhi and Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.